Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video with me, Shruti. You're watching Living Our Ascension. Today I'm at this really beautiful place that has these cliffs by the sea, and it's actually quite close to where I live. I actually just walked here from my house, and because I was here yesterday and we discovered this new trail, and I just had to come back here to film. So even though today it's a little bit more grey than yesterday and you can't really see as well, but I hope that you still enjoy this location. There's a little bit of wind, as there always is by the sea, and I hope that doesn't disturb the sound, but I'll do my best. So today I want to speak about, it's a really important phase that's going on, because we're in the middle of the eclipse season, and we've already had 2 eclipses in the month of July, and now that we've just entered August, we have one on the 11th of August as well. And I want to speak as to what are the higher energies, not just the astrological energies, but the higher energies, the highest that we can activate in our spirituality, in our ascension, and what that is and what's going on, basically. Because once we become aware of this, then it becomes easier to embody it, because becoming conscious of something is the very first step, to embodying it. So basically, there's been a lot of focus during this eclipse season on the divine feminine and really accepting the divine feminine within us. So whether you are a male or female, this is still important, even though one can say that women are the ones who are the embodiment of the divine feminine, like they embody this, the goddess flows through them, but really the goddess flows through all of us. We all have the feminine and masculine aspects within us, and actually at the higher stages of our enlightenment, we embody both equally. We have to come into a balance of the masculine and feminine, and of course we keep going through these initiations always along our journey, because that is what self-mastery is all about. But if you think about it, the eclipse, with the inclusion of the sun and the moon, they are quite literally also about this, the feminine and masculine, the moon being the feminine and sun being the masculine. So they really, these portals can help us to really come into this. So there's been a lot of focus on the divine feminine and just coming into the feminine side of us. And one of the things about the feminine is that it doesn't flow like the masculine does. So for example, we are so attuned to living in our masculine, because that's what we've been trained by society to do. And the masculine, for example, just has this graph, if you think about it, just going up and moving in this direction, just going up like that. Whereas the feminine flows through cycles. It's if you have to put it in the form of a graph, it's like these up and down, these troughs and crests. So whenever we are going within, whenever we are called to go within, the movement is cyclical like that. And that is what the feminine leads with. The feminine leads with the inner depth, with the intensity, and the intimacy with self. And the inner process going, becoming intimate with self, and of course the whole of the universe as well. And that is the direction of flow that the feminine leads. So whether this is within your relationships, between 2 people, that is what the person who carries the feminine charge more. So for example, if you're gay, there'll still be somebody in the relationship who carries more of that feminine polarity. And of course, between a male and a female, because no matter how masculine a woman you are or how feminine a man you are in your personality, if you are here in a female body or a male body, our bodies are set up that way. So there will still be, the greater part of you is still going to carry that. And this is when we find most fulfillment, when we first know ourselves as the body that we have come in. And then of course once we have fully without any preconceived notions, without any rejection of it, when we first come into becoming that feminine or that masculine, then after that comes our personality, which is like the more refined aspect, which can have these different aspects to it. You as a woman, you might have a more masculine nature, but the thing is that this movement of feminism, which is not grounded oftentimes, it's not, first we do have to know ourselves as feminine, and we have a long way to go for that. So let's not deny that. We don't deny any aspect of yourself. So going into one extreme of one or the other, both of them, just lead to imbalance. So anyway, the point is that, at this time we are really, whether we are male or female, we are being called to go into our feminine side, because that is what is giving birth to new momentum further on. So for example, even in astrology, in the skies right now, we have a lot of planets that have been either were in retrograde. We had Jupiter retrograde, Mars has been retrograde, and now Jupiter moved direct, but then Mercury started going retrograde. So there's a lot of retrograde movement, and retrogrades again have a more feminine energy, which means that the planets are not going forward, so they're not so, their energy is not so active in terms of going and achieving things in the external world, in the outside world, but their energy is to be used within, to come up, to explore and to come up with these insights. So there's a lot of emphasis, not just when it comes to higher energies, but even astrologically, to go within at this time. And so that's why the feminine becomes important, because the feminine is about that going within. And I wrote an article about this, which is more in depth and perhaps will bring more clarity about the importance of the feminine and the distinction between the masculine and feminine, and it's an important one, so I would recommend that you read it. I'll put a link below this video so that you can find it. But in this video I want to speak, of course, more, giving more personal examples or other examples as well about what's happening related to the eclipse. And so if you are finding that you are not able to move forward in your life in some area, it depends on where the eclipse and all of these energies are impacting you, or it can be several areas as well. So don't try and push forward, So for example, I made a video a couple of weeks ago actually, and since then I've been wanting to make an update, but then no matter what I did, it just didn't feel right. It didn't, until now, until today. So that's one example of it, because there was a lot that was coming through, and during these, when we are called to go within into our feminine, it's a lot about releasing everything that we have identified as in a previous cycle. So releasing the old, where the old is not only something negative, it's just that something helped you in the cycle before, and it's no longer needed for the creation of this new. And just like the female body has this process of, like, we get our periods, and we shed something that was that's no longer needed, through the process of the periods, and that's a release, and then new eggs are formed, there's a new birth. So the feminine is about that. It's about letting go constantly, going within, and figuring out what it is that needs to be released and let go, and what is the new that needs to be birthed. And often these can both be things that are hidden in the dark, so the shadow aspects of ourselves that we are scared of embracing. The feminine leads us into that, to see what that is, and then to embrace it fully, because when you see something, then it no longer needs to be there, it integrates with you, and then the new potential is also born from that space of that darkness and that blackness. So the hidden gems, the new talents that we have, this is all given birth, by the feminine, and this is how the feminine leads. And the feminine makes sure that we are never leaving behind parts of ourselves just in a bid to get ahead with that, forward movement, more masculine graph that I was speaking about, that begins here and just goes straight in a straight line. It has this end goal, which is beautiful. The divine masculine is a beautiful force as well. But if we are not taking care to figure out what needs to be released, then and what new needs to come through, if that process of regeneration, purification doesn't happen, death and rebirth doesn't happen, then we just keep creating something in the external that is not of value, not of substance, and doesn't hold a firm foundation. And once we have, figured out what that is, what needs to be released and what new is birthing, when we come face to face with that, with all of that, then we come into our wholeness, and we are one with all parts of ourselves. And then after that, the role of the masculine comes in, because then we can fully move forward, with that larger goal inside, that larger mission that we had, the star, the purpose, because the masculine is about inspiration, it's about purpose, and never losing sight of that goal. But the thing is that when we are just chasing a goal, and we are leaving behind parts of ourselves or others, around us that we care about, when it happens at the cost of that, then it's just something that we are building that doesn't really have a firm foundation. It's almost like, we're building something in smoke, and it's just like an illusion, and it collapses. Whereas when we work with the feminine aspect in equality, when we work within a balance of both, then we take the whole of ourselves, because we don't leave parts of ourselves behind. So the parts of us that, for example, if you are, not acknowledging that there's some unhealed emotions within you, and you just keep moving forward, ultimately it's going to blow up. But if you spend time there just to embrace what is there, and because whenever we are going through something, when any kind of healing also, it's basically because something new wants to birth. And when we figure out what that is, then we come into this wholeness. And the feminine also, how do we actually practically do that? I want to give you a tip for that, is just to relax and to be in this moment, and to not need to be somewhere else other than where you are. So if things are not moving forward, just breathe and be where you are in that moment, without needing to be anywhere else. Because what we do when we do something like that is we create this blankness, this blank space, which is what the feminine is about. If you look at the night sky, it's just empty. And when you create that, then within that, the light rushes through. So the masculine aspect is light, and the feminine aspect is that blackness, that void. And when you actually create that void without any preconceived notions within it, with nothing except just blankness and emptiness, and the willingness to receive, the willingness to be led, the feminine allows herself to be led, and in the external. And like I said before, the feminine leads in internal ways. So both are leading, both these forces have a leadership quality. But the feminine allows herself to be led by the masculine, and just surrenders herself, makes herself completely empty to be filled in once this integration has taken place. And so allow yourself to do that, for to just be empty like that. And within that space, when we actually fully become empty, without any preconceived notions, without anything, just holding space for the new to come in, and holding space for us to be led by something greater, by a force greater than us. Eventually, it might not happen immediately, but eventually the light rushes in. So the inspiration rushes in, and you'll feel like your cells are just vibrating with this new energy, with this new purpose, and that is when the masculine comes in as well. And then there'll be nothing that, is able to stop us from taking that action, because we are so super inspired. And this is the process of the masculine and feminine flow, which we should have always, from the small decisions to the big decisions. Once we keep choosing it again and again in our lives, it becomes more automatic, and it is something that's happening anyway within us, whether we like it or not. It's just about, when we embrace it, then there's no struggle. We let go of that process of struggle. There's all of these dogs, there's like 5-6 of them. They're very curious to see what I'm doing. But we let go of that process of struggle, and once we do that, then everything just becomes so much easier, and we just flow. What people call in the spiritual community being in flow, this is what it is. So we are really advised to take out time and make way for that feminine process to happen, and the light will just come in. We actually don't need to do anything to be inspired, to know what right action to take. And then once we actually create that void space, that emptiness, ultimately it'll happen, and it needs to happen in its own timing, which is what we call divine timing as well, because we can't always control things the way that we think is right. Things have a way of coming together. When you are doing nothing and you're just holding space, it's actually not that there's no action. There's a lot of action that's going on beneath the surface. Just like the ocean, there's so many layers underneath it, and we can't, just because we can't see doesn't mean that there isn't life thriving and happening. There's a lot of action that's going on beneath the surface as well. So that is what the feminine is about. Hello. And lately I've been seeing examples of this. People have been going through these coming into their embracing the feminine more, whether it's within themselves and others, because once we are able to hold space for this within ourselves to some degree, then we can also do it for others. And I've been seeing many examples of how this has been happening. So I'll give you a few examples. So someone I know, they were telling me how they have a friend, and the friend kind of wrote an article about these things that women are expected to do. I won't go into details, but they were speaking about the gender roles and the work situation, how women are not treated, given the same salaries and stuff like that, and yet they're asked to compete with men in the same way. There's all of these things, and they were genuinely, in this article, they expressed within vulnerability how they perhaps succumbed to a few of those things, or they were just wondering, to what extent it feels right to be to, let's say, dress up a certain way that you're expected to within society, and this is important for us to do this. But I found that somebody that I know, like a man in my life, I won't say who, but they actually made a comment on this article, and they kind of expected this woman who was a friend of theirs to be to be more clear and to hold this this empowered feminine role, and just say no to everything that the patriarchy dictates or whatever's required in the workplace. But whereas this woman in her article was expressing her vulnerability as well, saying that it's a bit confusing and it's hard for us to know what our desires are versus society's desire, and what to choose and what to do. Like if you know that you're going to get a job just by dressing a certain way because you're required to be that way, whatever the definition of formal and feminine is. And they were expressing, how it's like a it can be a bit confusing, and this man who was a friend of theirs expected her to be, not to leave like a wishy-washy reply, whereas to have one stand and to just go with it, to have this empowered feminine response to it. But the thing is that this vulnerability, expressing vulnerability is also very feminine, and this is then when I was speaking to this person, to this man in my life, they were actually speaking about this to me, and then they came to that conclusion that they were perhaps a little bit harsh on their friend. And although this happened years ago, this was coming up now during the eclipses, and yeah, so it's you see how then they also came into their own this feminine space of holding space for the other person, holding the space of vulnerability, not needing women or others to have this role, this empowered role, and kind of projecting yet another role on them. So this is how also we are integrating the feminine within us, the allowing vulnerability, allowing us to express, because there's a lot of healing that can happen just through that. Readers don't need to always read something where you have decided one way and then they know that yes, this is the empowered way. Sometimes when we as humans, we need to express our human side, and when we express vulnerability, that is also very healing in itself. And so I noticed that when men are able to hold space for women to express their vulnerability and just whatever they're feeling, instead of prematurely trying to fix that problem with a premature action, when you can just hold space and allow the feminine to do its thing, like, whether that's shedding all her layers and completely breaking down, disintegrating, because that is the process of transformation. Like a phoenix, we completely let go of the identity that we held, and that death process needs to be allowed, and we need to be comfortable holding that space for each other. And I've seen that when men are able to do this, they're able to hold that space, then within that space already there's a lot of healing that happens. Suddenly there's this new birth and there's this new empowerment, and from that space then they can take the right action, because they first allowed, they were with the feminine, they were able to see, they're able to take the right action, but from a space of wholeness, because they allowed for that wholeness to first take place. And this is what, the masculine, the empowered masculine is all about. So if you imagine, this image was coming to me also at this time, is like, if you imagine like a diamond, and you imagine like this is the earth, this is the ground, and below the ground there's like a diamond, and this represents the feminine. So like kind of like an iceberg, that the iceberg, you can see a little bit on the surface, on the top above the water, but below the water there's the same amount of the iceberg that's floating, probably even more. But the feminine and masculine is like that the more depth that we allow, we can only build on top, to that extent. If there's an imbalance, then something that we're trying to build up here just doesn't have any relevance. It doesn't really exist. It's only temporary. So that balance is what we are integrating now in different ways, in through the examples also that I'm giving to you. And a lot of the women that I know, including myself, we were going through, these old timelines were coming up for us, timelines of, let's say, different kinds of abuse, whether it was physical, verbal, emotional, to large and small degrees that we've had in the past. They were coming up, even of past lifetimes, patterns that you don't perhaps really necessarily recognize, but it's also in the collective as well. So, because the collective, the history of our planet has been, we all know how it's been. So there's been a lot of abuse that was suppressed behind the surface, that was also out there, physical. And sometimes when we go through these intense periods of purging, it's also because we're doing it for the collective, we're holding space. So, in big ways and small, it was coming up, and we were integrating something within, because we're coming into a new empowerment. And both men and women, like I explained, in different ways. And it's just really wonderful to see. I can really feel how, it's such an in-depth process this time during this eclipse that's happening. Like, we're really touching the deepest layers within ourselves, and for those of us who are choosing the right thing, it's amazing. And some of the most transformational moments in my life were when people were able to just hold space. So for example, I remember when I went to whenever people acknowledge the journey that I've been through, even if I wasn't choosing something right in the moment, but they acknowledged that this is what you did. And now it's just time to choose something else. But before, they didn't just jump in and give me the direction that this is what you need to do and you need to change. The first step is about unconditional love and holding that space of the feminine. And the more masculine direction, giving advice, comes later, and often, is not even needed to that extent once we hold that unconditional space and we acknowledge the other person, what they have done so far, the journey that they've been on. And there's a lot of healing that, happens within that space by just holding space for them and acknowledging the journey that they've been through. We already come into a sense of wholeness within there. And then, from that space of wholeness, then any advice that you give yourself, and this is something that we do for ourselves, because, blame doesn't help anyone. Pointing stuff out, criticizing doesn't help anyone, whether that's ourselves or our partners or anyone else. So this can be really powerful and potent as well when we do that. And then within that space, then, whenever a new direction is mentioned, like if a friend of mine gives me advice after holding that unconditional space, I'm in a better space to receive it as well. So that is something that I'm really seeing happen now we are magically transforming, you know. Recently, a friend that I was with, you know, during the eclipse, they would really acknowledge the journey that I've been on. I was speaking to them about my health journey, and they are really into nutrition, and you know, they know a lot about it. They're very balanced and grounded when it comes to this, because even becoming vegan is a bit of a journey. You know, you have to go through, try different things with your body, see what works, and then the whole process of, there's so much information out there that's false, and just coming into and finding what's right for you and what is balanced and grounded. And when I was speaking to them about, you know, all of these things that I'd been through, the choices that I'd made, some of them were not right, or any addictions, they were really understanding about it. And you know, they acknowledged how it's just a process, you know. And as soon as they said that, you know, something within me felt whole. It's like I needed that acknowledgement, and I was kind of in that space where I was giving it to myself, and so I also saw it happening in the external through another person. And then after that, you know, something that they said, oh wow, there's somebody that's doing paragliding. I should show you. There, up there. And as soon as they acknowledged, you know, that this is the journey that I've been on, and it's, you know, because often we're on this journey alone, doing things, you know, and making choices, and we don't realize that others also go through the same thing. And as soon as they acknowledged that, it, you know, it really led to this wholeness within me. It was that I'd done the work, and there was this last bit that was missing that needed to come through, and that happened. It's kind of like they held space for me, and I had emptied myself, I'd made space, and through the external I attracted somebody who was mirroring that to me, and then this wholeness took place. And then after that, you know, they mentioned a few points about nutrition, and something that they said really hit home, and I may have heard it before, but the way that they said it, you know, it just changed something within me, and some changes that I've been wanting to make my whole life. It just happened suddenly, you know, in like an instant. That action happened, and it doesn't need to be something really huge. It can be something small, but it's about the significance. There's all these dogs. It's about the significance of the change, and that change suddenly happened for me. Within that moment, there was just this transformation. So we're going through moments like this, big and small, in our ascension, and especially for each other. You know, there's a lot of because we're used to doing all of this for ourselves, just within ourselves, but because the South Node eclipse was in Aquarius, which is about communities, there was a lot of focus with doing this with others, you know, which is always really nice when we start to see these communities forming and holding space for each other, and not just always working with ourselves, which is also a sacred process. But we're really seeing how within interactions with others and expressing ourselves in community, you know, in the different roles that we have. Like I was giving you an example of the woman who was a blogger. You know, she's expressing a point of view to a whole community, and so we're embracing each other in all of those roles without judgment, and you know, within equality and balance as well. Because whenever people have an opinion they express, if it triggers something within us, you know, it can often trigger something that is unhealed within us. So through all of these interactions, we're coming into a greater balance of the feminine within, and then the masculine gets empowered through that as well. The true masculine just comes through all of these examples that I've given you, where suddenly when somebody held space for me, after that the light came through. You know, I knew that inspired action that I needed to take, and I was able to just take it. And a couple of such other examples that I've given you also. So I hope that this video was helpful to see, you know, how you can go through this process now, how you can hold space for yourself and others, and to recognize when all of these old thoughts are coming, because often, you know, old timelines and things that we've been through also will suddenly come up, and that's what happened with me also. This is because the wind is so strong. So now you're getting a 360, and I don't even need to do anything to the camera. But let's just bring it back over here. suddenly, I one day had this thought about just this kind of argument that I had with someone really long ago, like years ago, and it was like a male relative of mine from last year, and just something that how they were behaving, and I couldn't figure out why. It was just out of context, just out of nowhere, it suddenly came up, that thought within me. And that's because it represents the energy that we are going through, and there's no more need for this type of competition. Instead, we're coming into harmony and balance, and if you are one of the ones who are conscious about this, then you're making change, you're helping change that in society. And the eclipse is really powerful to help us to anchor that. So I think I should wrap up because the wind is just driving my camera insane. But so the one thing that I wanted to mention before I leave is that I will be having these old services that are back now, because it's Mercury retrograde, and Mercury is about making changes, and sometimes things come back from the past, and the services that I used to offer were astrology ones that were about relationships, and because I'm finding a lot of focus on this in my life right now, so even though I've taken it off in favor of other services, I'd like to bring it back. And it really basically, I haven't put it together yet, although by the time that I upload this video I probably will. So you can check it out on my website, which is www.livingourascension.com. So they speak about the astrology codes that are mentioned within our birth chart as well as our higher charts. There's actually other charts, according to ancient astrology. There's other higher charts that represent our soul mission and our soul mate. So our soul mate, it's not just about finding someone outside of ourselves that is our soul mate, because when we align with those codes, we align with our soul purpose as well, because the people that we attract in our lives, they represent what our soul is here to do. Often we learn through relationships the most, and that's how we integrate. And even it's said that that is the chart of our future incarnation, the next time that we incarnate on this planet, or what we are becoming in the second part of our life. So it's important in multiple ways. But also, if you are looking at relationships and there's some problems that arise, or you just want to explore more, see what kind of codes are hidden within your chart, then you can have a look at these services. There's two kinds that I will offer. One is just for yourself, to see what the soulmate chart looks like, to see what your higher self chart looks like, because it's called the higher self chart or the soulmate chart. As well as the second service will be about relationship compatibility, so between two people, and that's comparing two different charts of partners and seeing what patterns there are. So it can really shed light on any issues that you've been having with your partner. But not only that, also all of those things that really make the relationship beautiful and unique, and in what way, what kind of connections you have at a physical level, what kind of connections you have at a soulmate level, and how you will be able to help each other in different ways at the physical level, socio-economic level, as well as the higher levels, which is the our soul level, the soul mission that we are here to fulfill. So it can get very interesting. They're interesting tools if they're used the right way. Then I will also have, if you order these services, then there can also be some Skype sessions that you have with me, and but you can read more about it in the description, which let's say if you're going through some relationship problems, how to bridge that, and as seen through astrology, as well as my own suggestions, through I will probably come up with certain exercises that I tailor make just for you. So have a look at all of that, because I still need to put it together. And also, I wanted to say that recently I've written a few blog posts, so please check them out as well, because if you're watching me just on YouTube, then you don't really get to see what I share on other forums. So the blogs, I've written a few poems as well, and especially related to the topic that I'm speaking about today, masculine and feminine. I wrote a blog post yesterday. So find all of that on my website, and find the link below this video to that. and I will see you very soon in the next video. Have a wonderful week.